Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us again here at Port Haven on YouTube. We are here today with a special Halloween review of Star Wars Death Troopers. And I'm here, Professor Jango, with my good pal Yodabauer.
Yodabauer,
How are you today?
doing just fine. It's a nice spooky day. It's very appropriate. It's a little bit rainy.
Well, spooky is the name of the game today. We are here with a Legends review. So we've not done a Legends book review on our YouTube channel, uh, really since Legends has
Correct.
been a thing. So
Right.
since
Yeah.
since the new canon has been the new canon, we've focused on the new canon. But Legends is the name for what happened to every other expanded universe book and video game when Disney bought it out. And Death Troopers by Joe Schreiber is one of those books. So this book came out in 2009, so it's just about 8 years old. But we read it today because it is a Star Wars horror novel. So what better thing to read for Halloween than a Star Wars horror novel?
Yeah. This was actually a rereading experience for me. I read it. I don't think right when it came out, but I read it around like paperback time when it came out. It does not seem like that long ago, but I guess it was.
Yeah, well, I'd never read this before, so this was a completely new experience for me. And actually, this is the first horror novel that I've ever read, so that was a new experience for me too.
Yeah, I had not read another one at the time, and the only other one I've read is the other novel by this author, which is Red Harvest, which is the eventual prequel, but that will be for another Halloween.
Right. Well, just to give you a quick idea of what Death Troopers is about. So Death Troopers, again, you can see the cover of the book shows a zombie stormtrooper here. But the idea is that the book starts out on a prison barge, an Imperial prison barge, and we see a lot of different characters there that are in prison in transit to a more permanent sort of labor facility that the Empire has.
Mm-hmm.
And their ship breaks down on the edge of wild space, and they come across what looks to be a derelict star destroyer. And so they go on board the
Mm-hmm.
star destroyer to look for parts. And when they do that, they bring back a viral infection which kills off most of the crew and prisoners on the prison barge, and then later on resurrects them in the form of undead zombie aliens and stormtroopers. And then the cast of
They
characters
wake
has to
up.
work to survive. Yes, they wake up. As a matter of fact, is one of the one of the titles of the book. Not incredibly subtle. Um, yeah.
Nope.
So uh, that's kind of what the book is. Again, you can read it or go to Wikipedia if you want a more in-depth kind of point-by-point plot review. We're here more for
Mm-hmm.
just some of our impressions. So, what was your overall impression of the book?
Overall, I really liked it. I think it benefited from it's actually a pretty short novel. The
Mm-hmm.
hardcover version, particular read through, was about 234 pages. Um, so I think that really helped the book in that it kept everything tense. Like the pacing was really strong because they kept the story like, right where it needed to be. It wasn't like all these other side plots that didn't matter. Like any other side plot in the story really built up what the central narrative was.
Right. And again, because this is my only ever horror novel that I've read, I don't really have much of a frame of reference to compare. But just the amount of suspense that this book maintained for really the first half of the book, like this sense of
Yeah.
growing dread, and then once everything started
Mm-hmm.
popping off, it's like it all happened at once. And so it went from this being this
Yes.
really suspenseful novel to this incredibly action packed novel, and I found
Mm-hmm.
that just to be really a lot of fun. So talk to me a little
Yeah,
bit
I
about.
thought the
Go ahead.
I was gonna say the characters are really strong. I think that really helped with it too. Like there wasn't anybody that I didn't like in the book. Like there were characters I didn't like, but I didn't like in the wrong way. Like I loved to hate the characters that I hated. There was no one like, would you just get eaten already? Because I couldn't handle them.
Right. Well, that's one thing I want to talk about here just a little bit. So, if your book is like mine, on the back of the book, it kind of spoils a lot of what's going on, and it says there are 6 survivors of the initial virus, and so those
Mm-hmm.
survivors, you have Dr. Zahara Cody, an Imperial
Mm-hmm.
doctor on board the prison barge. You have an officer named Sartoris, who's one of the prison guards, who has a reputation for torture, and as a matter of fact, in the events directly preceding the novel, had tortured and killed the father of 2 of the other characters, both of who were brothers, Trig and Kale. And then who are the
Mm-hmm.
other two? That was a surprise moment. The other 2 survivors of the virus who just happened to be on board.
Just happened to be there. Two of the people in the Star Wars galaxy that just have the worst luck of being in the right place at the wrong time. It seems.
Yeah, so as the virus has progressed and Dr. Zahara is looking for survivors, she noticed that there are 2 survivors down in solitary confinement, and she goes down
Mm-hmm.
there, and wouldn't you just know it, it's Han and Chewie.
It's Han and Chewie. They're there. And it was great too because the whole time they'd been built up like you don't want to get sent to solitary, and solitary is where the worst of the worst of the worst criminals go. And there were some pretty bad criminals in on this barge. Like there were whole gangs that would just kill you if they didn't like you.
Right,
And then the 2 worst of the worst in solitary were Han and Chewie of all people.
right. And it was just even before they're like rebels, so like there's no like real
Yeah,
like these are people involved in the rebellion against the Empire, so we're gonna keep them in solitary confinement.
yeah,
These are just low level smugglers who
yeah.
who
This is
have been
before New
relegated
Hope.
to this.
This novel.
Right. Yeah, that's worth pointing out too. That this takes place before we see any of these characters in a film,
Mm-hmm.
even in a upcoming prequel about a younger Han Solo. So maybe we get some Death Troopers up there with our our
I mean,
Han Solo.
we already have Tag and Binks, so I think anything's possible now.
Yeah, you never know. Ron Howard might be a fan. Also, were there any of these 6 characters that you particularly loved or wanted to talk about?
I really felt for Trig. So Trig is the younger of the 2 brothers, and he has it rough. I like his dad has recently they're this family on this prison barge, and the kids like he and his brother basically just got scooped up when his father got arrested, and the Empire doesn't really care, so they just took the kids too. I'm pretty sure didn't they say his mother was dead, right?
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
I think early on they said something had happened to his mother, and like his older brother Kale, like I felt bad because he is a teenager, but he was at an age where he could at least kind of understand what was going on. But Trig was just young enough to not really understand anything.
Right.
Um, and it's pretty rare to write a kid around that age where they're not annoying too, and they managed to make Trig not annoying. But
Hmm.
I thought it was really strong. Like when their father died, they were around, and Trig has this memory of his father telling him to take care of his brother,
Right.
and thinking like that must have been meant for his older brother Kale, because why should the little brother have to take care of the older one? But he had like this kind of strange sense of responsibility from it, and he just had a rough time, especially with what ends up happening to his brother.
Right. Spoiler alert. Not all of these characters
Spoiler alert.
survive. As much as
Not
you can
all of them
spoil
make
a
it,
book
no,
that's been out for 8 years
for
now.
so many years. Yeah.
Right. Um, one of the characters that I felt really drawn to, of course, Trig. I feel like it is meant to be our kind of in to the
Mm-hmm.
novel. Trig and Dr. Cody, who I also liked a lot.
Mm-hmm.
This idea that she, uh, in a world of advanced medicine and droids, went into an undervalued profession to be a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Like the idea that that was a kind of secondary level profession in the Star Wars universe was not something I'd ever thought about before. But I liked
Mm-hmm.
how even as part of the Empire, she is this sort of compassionate figure, And then the contrast of that with Sartoris, who is this literally torturous figure.
Mm-hmm.
And especially
Yeah.
again, I don't want to spoil too much, but how their kind of endings coincided with one another in the end.
Mm-hmm.
I thought was written really well.
Yeah. She definitely had an interesting arc, and it's like not only is she in this undervalued profession, but she's also a doctor on a prison barge, and the Empire didn't really care about these prisoners at all. Like they literally the only thing they cared about is that the prisoners didn't escape. They didn't really care what the prisoners did to each other once they were in the prison. So
Right.
I assume that there was a doctor at all was primarily more for the crew or because of some regulation, and not because the Empire actually cared to give medical treatment to any of these prisoners.
Right. And one of the things about that too that really surprised me is, especially among other Star Wars novels that I've read, and I guess this book stands out in this regard because it is a horror novel, but the graphic level of this book is so different than any other Star Wars novel that I've read. Even from the scenes where they're just in the prison interacting with other
Right.
prisoners, all the way up to
Yeah.
a chapter which is very accurately named Skin Hill, which is
Skin Hill.
exactly what it sounds like.
You know, you can only remember so much of a novel that you read 7, 8 years ago. But I remembered Skin Hill. That was probably the part of the book that never really left me. Um, and yeah, it's what you think it is. It's pretty much the yeah.
Yeah, this is a novel that
Oof.
does not pull its punches in that regard. Even in
Yeah,
terms of
and
like just like blaster shots and wounds, like the description
mm-hmm.
like felt more like realistic to me of like what would happen if you got shot with a blaster than we see in other Star Wars media too.
Yeah, for sure. Or there's a point where Dr. Cody is trying to get the virus out of a patient,
Mm-hmm.
um, and that was particularly graphic too.
Right.
It was, yeah. But on to that point, I think another thing he did really well. This is something that's hard to do in a book because books are obviously a text-based art form, but sound is an incredibly well used aspect in the book,
Right.
because that's how the zombies communicate with each other, which is not that unusual, I guess, in zombie lore, I would assume. But just the way he was able to describe how these zombies were howling, because really early on, when before the viruses really started to spread, the Imperial team that's like investigating the shall we say ghost ship
Right.
of the Star Destroyer, they find the lung room, which is terrifying. It's just like these
Mm-hmm.
lungs in a vat, and then the lungs like start calling on their own, and then like at that point you should have just known something bad was going on.
Right. And even to that idea, the use of sound, the description of like open space becomes terrifying
Mm-hmm.
too when you have a star destroyer which is literally supposed to hold tens of thousands of people, and you walk into it and it's empty. Like we understand what a star destroyer is, and we understand the scale of them. That's the first shot of Star Wars, is look how big a
Yep.
star destroyer is. And then to think about that just being this cavernous empty space, like that just gives you this sense of dread too. Um, a couple things else that we wanted to talk about in our review that are kind of tertiary to the book, I suppose. Tell us a little bit about uh, how this book is a tie-in novel of sorts.
Yeah, so we brought up Han and Chewie earlier, and I remember reading it, and that Han and Chewie were in the novel spoiled for me, because in one of the back pages of the novel, where you have like acknowledgments, maybe an excerpt of an upcoming novel or whatever, there was also a promo for Star Wars Galaxies, which that's how old this book was. Star Wars Galaxies was still a thing. It was the Star
Right.
Wars MMO before the Old Republic. Uh, and the game had to have been on its way out at that point. but they did a level in, or I should say like a, I don't know, they're called flashpoints in the Old Republic. I don't know what they were
An
called in
event.
Galaxies, but event. They did an event where you would go and you would fight Death Troopers, and I'm not sure if it was like they wanted to do this in Galaxies, and so then they wrote the book. I don't know if they like commissioned the book and then they thought it would be a good thing to put into Galaxies. I don't know if it was a thing at the same time. There was a lot of cross promotion going on, and the advertisement in the back of the book very plainly told me that Han and Chewie were going to be in the novel, which them being in the novel is kind of a twist. So it felt like kind of a fumble. But there, I mean, you can see in that picture there's a Twi'lek with a lightsaber, and there's no Jedi in this novel whatsoever. So that's supposed to be a scene out of the game.
Right.
So I don't know. It was a little bit weird. And I also remember when the novel came out, it was we were in the second season of Star Wars: The Clone Wars. We were in the Geonosis arc, which to date was the longest arc in Star Wars: The Clone Wars. I think it was like technically 7 episodes, start to finish.
Mm-hmm.
And there was an episode called Brain Invaders, where there were parasites that infected the clone troopers, or as you can say there, Barris Offee was also a target. And so that kind of had zombies in it. They weren't quite the same zombies, like they didn't decompose. You could get the parasite taken out of your head and you would be fine. So it wasn't a true zombie thing, but it was kind of a zombie thing. And it came out at around the same time. So they were definitely trying to really promote this idea. I don't know enough about the behind the scenes to know which came first, but it was kind of interesting.
Right. And to that end too, it's interesting too when you think about this book, especially because it's so old. Um, and I say that relatively. It's not like Splinter of the Mind's Eye from the '70s or anything,
Right.
but compared to recent canon novels, it is older, and to think too about just the impact that it's had on
Mm-hmm.
the sort of universe at large, not just in those video games, but we saw Death Troopers show up in Star Wars, um, some of the mobile games. You see Death
Yep.
Troopers costumes and cosplays at conventions and things. So it's had a larger impact on the Star Wars world than a single kind of one-off, even with a prequel uh,
Mm-hmm.
novel might otherwise have had.
Yeah, for sure. And even to the point where one of those mobile games is a game called Star Wars Commander, which you and I were both really into for a period of time until it got to the point where you had to start paying money to be any good at it.
Right.
But it is a fun game. It's a lot like, oh, what's that one? Oh, I can see it. It's like the big buff dude with like the yellow helmet hair. It was really big for a while. I'll think of it. It doesn't matter. But it's a base protection game, but you would have to like build a base, and then other players online would try to attack your base.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, they eventually added a Death Troopers unit, and that game is technically within the canon era. And they claim that a lot of the mobile games are canon, but I think it's more of like the existence of things is canon, like not that your base is canon,
Right.
but more of fighting on this planet is a thing. But it was interesting that they brought in Death Troopers. It was for a Halloween special. I don't think it's constantly in the game. But
Right.
I mean, that's how long the notion of them persisted.
Right. G level canon, as it were.
G level canon, yes.
Well, do you have any other thoughts on the novel before we wrap things up?
I just that I highly recommend it. Like I think a lot of people get on zombies if you're not already into them. Like
Right.
some people can't get enough of the zombie stuff, but other people are like, oh, zombies are in everything. I don't want zombies in Star Wars too. But I thought it was really well done. Like, there's enough of an explanation, maybe not in Death Troopers, but in Red Harvest, which I know that we're not talking about, where I think it kind of contains it. But even to the
Mm-hmm.
extent with Death Troopers, the virus is contained in this one little place, like on these ships. It's not. It makes sense that it doesn't spread to all these different planets, which would be my main concern of once there's zombies in Star Wars, how do you stop them? But I thought
Right.
I thought if you're going to have zombies in Star Wars, they did it responsibly and they did it right.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't get past zombies in Star Wars, I can't really help you. But just that maybe you should give it a try because it is handled really well.
Right. And I would say too, some of the reviews that I read of this book before I read it talked about how different it was from other Star Wars novels. But to me, I think that's one of the selling points of this is that we
Mm-hmm.
don't get a lot of just sort of pure genre novels among the Star Wars, even the Legends canon. It's not like
Mm-hmm.
we have a big series of Star Wars noir novels or Star Wars Louis L'Amour Western novels or something like that. And so just to
Right.
have a novel that is a pure kind of horror genre novel was one really refreshing, but two, I thought was just well executed. Like I really enjoyed it
Mm-hmm.
as a novel as well. Um,
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
so that's kind of been our review and look back at Star Wars Death Troopers. We hope that you have a happy Halloween as you read this, and maybe check it out for some suspense and horror of your own. Be sure to like and subscribe to this video and join us at
Mm-hmm.
our forums to discuss it more with us. And until next
Yeah,
time,
absolutely. Hope to see you there.
yep, I'm Professor Jango,
I'm Yodabauer.
and we'll see you next time.